in the Bay Area. Oh, thank you. Yes, we are recording. I have to press got it so I can see all your faces. I am in the Bay Area, and I have a 6-month-old, almost 6-month-old baby boy with my partner. We welcomed him in August, and we have our 3 cats. We have our Subaru. We have it all. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy. Jess.
Hey everybody, my name is Jess. I go by they, them, or she, her is fine also. I live in the Bay. I live in Oakland with my partner and our almost 3-year-old. They'll be 3 in April. Their name is Harper. We're raising them primarily with they, them pronouns until they kind of decide what they want to do. And they are here us and our senior dog, Maggie, who's 14. We just got a puppy because, like, why not in a pandemic, add another log to the fire. So we now have a 9-week-old puppy named Billy. And we have 3 chickens in our backyard. So we kind of have a whole lot going on. Yeah, and I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. Michelle.
I love that, Jess. That was amazing. Michelle, they, them pronouns, big and long time fan and advocate of our family coalition. So big thank you for holding space and creating conversation around this topic. Super glad to be here. My wife and I have a 9-year-old and almost 6-year-old. They are girl identified for now. And navigating their way in the world. We had been living in the Bay Area for 20 years and then moved to Portland, Oregon right before the pandemic hit. So finding our legs in a time when the world is closed down and trying to build a new queer community has been a challenge. Glad to know there's some Portland connections on the call. And my wife and I used known donors. So friends of ours, it was a 2-year process of finding a known donor. Those folks are in our lives. Their parents are additional grandparents to our kiddos. They're uncles to our kiddos. And we have pretty regular connection with them, even though they live in the Bay Area. So that's us.
Awesome. Allie.
Yeah, hi, thank you. My name's Allie. I use she, her pronouns. I am kind of the odd one out here on the panel. I feel like I live in Kansas City, a suburb of Kansas City. Go Chiefs. And my wife and I have a 2-year-old daughter named Amelia. We had about 3 months of normal, quote unquote, normal parenting before the pandemic hit. So it's turning out to be the pandemic is more of the normal parenting than pre-pandemic. So we're just trying to navigate that in this current world, and I'm excited to hear from the other panelists and listen to how maybe more experienced parents have navigated this. So I too am happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and we'd love to hear some perspective from Kansas City because we get a lot of West Coast perspective, let me tell you. So your voice is very appreciated. And thank you for staying up later. Malia.
Okay. Hi. Thanks, Crystal, for the invitation. And Polly, I feel like you had something to do with this too. So thank you too. I just like to thank you, Polly, for anything. I'm like the president of the Polly fan club also. So my name is Malia, she, her, my pronouns, she, her, ella. And we are actually new to the Bay Area. We moved here, I feel like I've been saying 1 year and forever, but we moved here in 2020. So kind of like right smack in the middle, at the end of 2020, right smack in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic. So my perspective is, as a parent, is more, I guess it's more of an East Coast perspective because we moved from Baltimore. and where all of my family is in the Maryland area. My wife, Mimi, her family is also on the East Coast. So we are navigating parenthood and her working full time and me not working, and pandemic, everything, and trying to build like a Black community, or find our way to a Black community in the Bay Area, which we have no idea where everybody went. But yeah, here we are, and glad to be on the panel.
Awesome, thank you. So let's kind of jump into some of the conversation, the questions that we have for the panel. We're gonna kind of go chronological of like trying to conceive, through pregnancy, through having the child, and folks are gonna chime in when they have a relevant story or thought or addition that they want to bring up. And so feel free, panel, to pop in as something comes to you. So let's start with the idea, the trying to conceive, that we're ready to build our family. I would love to know, some people know going into this process that they are not going to be the biological and or gestational parent. Other people, that becomes something that they either have to make that decision or mourn a loss or what have you. But I'd love for some people to share what your process was in trying to conceive and the conversations that you had with your partner to come to the decision that you would be the non-bio, non-gestating parent. Who might want to jump in first?
I can talk a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah.
So for us, for our family, it was not really dramatic. It wasn't really a conversation. I've never wanted to be pregnant, but I have always wanted to be a mom. My father was adopted, so from a young age, I had always anticipated adopting, which is sort of how it worked out currently. So I had always planned on being a non-biological mother somehow. And my wife had a very intense desire to be pregnant, something of which I do not understand. And she really wanted to be pregnant. She is actually about 8 years older than me, so had done a lot of fertility testing before we had even started dating, and was going to go down kind of that road. Without a partner to freeze eggs or kind of just make some decisions. So once we got married and were wanting to get pregnant and have a kid, it was just, of course, she would get pregnant. So for us, it was kind of a simple decision. Now we've been trying to conceive for our second and have had some pretty significant secondary infertility. So down the line, we might do reciprocal IVF, because I still do not want to be pregnant. So going down that, I think will be a little bit different perspective. But yeah, it was kind of just made sense for us and for our family.
Yeah, and it just works out sometimes that way. Like you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is how straight couples didn't really have a big conversation.
Yeah, it was I felt very lucky that I could have a child and not do any of the hard work. So yeah, we got lucky that way.
Awesome. Anyone else have a different kind of experience they want to share?
I have a different experience. Oh, Leah, would you like to go? You raised your hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Randy. You have purple hair. Go Ravens.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh yeah, there you go. Only true Baltimore. Talking football, y'all. So I had a different experience with that. I have always wanted to carry. I've had a very strong desire to carry. I worked in the birthing community. I've worked for years as a nanny. I've worked with kids, and I always knew I wanted to be a parent. And I always had the desire to carry a pregnancy. And as my partner and I were, following the road to parenthood and figuring out what we were going to do, started to go in for tests and fertility and things like that, because we wanted to make sure, we were doing it the right way. We were thinking about reciprocal IVF, me carrying my partner's embryo and our baby, and kind of was thrown a wrench in the plan because unfortunately my uterus is not a viable place for me to have a baby. And this was kind of new for me. I didn't really know this. And so I went through that mourning process of like, I don't get this experience. I wanted this experience. I was really excited for reciprocal IVF. I thought it was a really great way for us to both be connected to our child. And I just felt really, in a way, kind of robbed. And it was hard for me. And so from there, we talked about like, okay, so what do we do? Like, do I try to fix this problem? Which we did, we tried and it didn't work. But then my partner, we just said, well, she identifies as she, her. We both have she, her pronouns. And she said, I have a uterus, I have a backup. And it was something she had never really had a strong desire to carry, but she did and loved it. And it's very funny when we're out in public or when our friends are talking, they always assume because I am the more feminine or femme presenting in our relationship that, the butch would want to carry. And like, we always made the joke, like, there's no butch maternity clothing, and like, ha, ha, ha. But a lot of people are still, it's really hard for them to wrap their heads around because they're stuck in that, cis normativity, heteronormativity way of thinking. So that's a little bit about my story of my experience of how we decided to bring, and our little boy's name is Dashel, and we call him Dash, into the world. And so we also have a known donor. And so the known donor came to us and said, I really want the two of you to be parents. And so I want to help you. And this is something that would be really, really great for me to do. And so we had all of these things going for us. And I was going, but I'm broken and this is so hard for me. And it was hard for me to miss out on a pregnancy. And it was hard for me as a birthing professional to have my partner experience that. And I wanted to experience it. And so there was a lot of emotions, but at the same time, people were like, she has the best care possible because you're there and you know everything. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we put a spin on it, I guess.
Yeah. And that it definitely works out that way as well. I mean, yay for backup uteruses. Yay.
We
But
love the
yes,
backups, and
we
love a good backup. And I ended up, to preserve a little bit of my fertility, because we weren't unsure how things were going to like kind of pan out during the pandemic, mind you. I ended up harvesting my eggs, and we got a couple embryos from that. So we will eventually possibly do a reciprocal IVF. And so I will have a different connection to my own biological child, but it'll be no different than what I have with Dash. But it was just kind of like, that's our route. And we had one plan, and the other plan kind of had to slide in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Malia, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and actually, thank you, Randy, for speaking. Although I feel like I should not have gone after you, because your story just really touched me. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the morning piece, I experienced that as well. So I actually, and ironically enough, I did not want to be a parent. I used to, I don't know, I grew up with this old wives' tale about like if somebody swept over their feet, that meant that they weren't going to get married or like be a parent or something. So I used to do it intentionally because I was like, no. And then when I met Mimi, and she was very clear about wanting to be a mom, and that was something that it was part of her life plan. It was going to happen with or without me. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to be in this person's life, I don't know how that's going to be in the same house with a baby, and I'm not the parent also. So so I was like, okay, I'm on the train. Here we go. And I am 6 years older than her. I turned 50 this year. So, and Langston is 3.5. So 2018, I was still in my mid to late 40s. I had already had a pregnancy in my 20s that ended in a miscarriage. And so I pretty much knew, I pretty much just assumed that I did not have a viable, a uterus that was going to support a pregnancy. And then when I went and had my hormone levels checked and everything, and they were like, yeah, you know, you're definitely, you know, advanced maternal age. It was pretty clear that she was going to be the gestational mom. So despite not having wanted to be a parent before, I went through that morning because I was like, I kind of had prepared myself for like the experience. And you know, I'm not religious, but I'm a very spiritual person. And so what I kicked right into was being like preparing our spiritual space and preparing a spiritual a nest for Langston to arrive into in our home. So when we get some scary news at one point, potentially scary news during the pregnancy, then I was like, okay, I had already set up an altar, and I was like lighting candles every week, and I had his like little sonogram, the picture of his, it was just when he was in Marola, not even a embryo yet. And so so Mimi calls me his spiritual mom. And she's his gestational mom. I don't know that that's accurate, because I feel like, you know, there are so many gestational parents who are also just as, you know, spiritual parent as you know, those of us who may have carried the baby here and in our soul, if not in our uterus. So yeah, that's a little bit about our trying to conceive. Oh, and my other contribution was that I was like, okay, then I will get the sperm. I don't have my own. So we tried with a known donor to do IUI. It didn't work, an at-home IUI, and also at-home IUI, and then with donor sperm from a bank. And I picked out the donor, and you know, it was kind of like this ritual to drive from Baltimore to Virginia to pick up the tank and take it to our fertility clinic. And I think they even let me do like the plunger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for the IVF, because we ended up having to do IVF. So we did 2 tries, one IUI and one IVF. And I absolutely believe that it should be called art, you know, because it is an art. And I mean, sure, it's a science, but there's just so much magic that happens. And there's so much that, like, Langston was really meant to be here, because so many things could have gone wrong and almost went wrong. And here he is, and he's amazing. So I don't regret any of the process.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, that's, I'm taking with me the, like, we carried them here. It really touched me. I would love to now talk about kind of that trying to conceive in the pregnancy portion. I know that in my family, we had a lot of conversations between my wife and I about what does this look like? How are we going to make sure that we are on the same page, and that I feel as much a part of the process as she does, and how are we going to explain things to our closest bubble of friends, our family, our really close friends, about how we talk about the pregnancy. You know, things like, we're both going to be moms. Maybe we'll have different names for that. Like, I'm an ama, she's mom or mama. But like, what did some of those early conversations between you and your partner and with family look like in order to preserve that feeling of unity and being a part of the process and not like, you know, the other mom, or what a lot of people sort of like, you know, you're the other parent. How did everyone navigate that?
I'm happy to start off
Sure.
again. So for us, and we kind of, I, not my wife, process everything like out loud. So, I mean, everyone that, you know, my work, our closest friends all knew that we were trying, because we would go to the fertility clinic. It's like 100 appointments before the IUI. And I would go to all the appointments, obviously pre-pandemic. And kind of everyone knew that we were trying, and so people wouldn't really ask because they would know like if there was something to be shared. And we just presented it as we were going to be moms. Now that our child kind of decided what was going to be like our names and that sort of thing. So my wife's mommy, I'm mama. But that wasn't ever like in our presentation of, you know, we're having a kid. It was, we're going to be moms, like our family is growing. And I think like, I don't know if it's because of the people that we allow in our life or what, but we've never had any, even, you know, here in Kansas, it's never been like, well, who's the real mom? Because Abby was definitely pregnant, but it was never a question of who, you know, it's our child. So that's never really been an issue for us. And it's important, you know, if there are like little, well, like specifics wanting to know about the sperm or that sort of thing, we just don't shy away from just, you know, if you want to know, you can know. And I think because of the type of people that we are, that it's just never been an issue for us. So we are very much mommy and mama now, but we were just moms before, and kind of let that, it was just never an issue for us. I feel like very non-dramatic, but
Those are great things to hear too. We don't need to just hear the horror stories. Does anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. So my partner and I, when we decided that we wanted to have a baby, we told like select few people. Some of those people are on this call, and some of our family, not our whole family, because we just, you know, we were excited. We told our queer family, everyone, right? But we were definitely like our bio families were like, yeah, we'll tell our parents, and we kind of like left it at that and waited until we actually were pregnant. And then the process was, we did at-home IUIs. So that we got very fortunate with it. I think the hardest part for us was when we were deciding, we wanted to try, it's always tricky for me because like, if you go through a sperm bank, you can have a known donor, but then if you don't go through a sperm bank, you can also have a known donor. So the difference is if you go through a sperm bank and you have a known donor, that means at the age of 18, your child can have contact with the donor, and that the donor is obligated to have at least one meeting with your child. There's no obligation beyond that, but that was something that was important to both of us. Myself in particular, I grew up without knowing my bio dad until I was probably about 25. And so knowing what it's like to not have access, I just felt like it was a really important thing that our child, Harper, now gets to actually have that opportunity to meet the person. And so the challenge that we faced was really finding sperm, to be honest. I identify as Black, and we wanted to have a family that would sort of mirror our family, and trying to find a Black donor at the sperm banks out here was very hard. And actually one of the largest sperm banks in San Francisco doesn't even have Black as an option. Like you can narrow everything down to like skin tone except for Black, hair color, eye color, all that. And then when my partner called and was like, so I'm noticing that the whole continent of Africa isn't even represented and that there's no Black people. And they basically were like, well, if you don't like our inventory, you know, you can kind of go somewhere else. And we're like, okay, well, I guess that's what we'll be doing then. So that was the tough part. The fun part was like doing the IUIs, because we like our midwife, she left the duck lips here. And so like whenever we're like, oh, I think you're ovulating, it's time. And so I was like a pro at going in and being like, with the headlamp and a flashlight, like looking at the cervix and be like, yep, it's time, let's go. You know, so that was kind of cool. And then getting to do the insertion piece. But yeah, the whole planning part, I don't know, it just kind of happened organically. I identify as my name is Papa and she's Mama, and it just kind of was that way. And, you know, I think some of our family was a little bit weirded out. Even some of our queer friends and family were kind of like, oh, Papa, huh? Like, are you transitioning? And I'm like, no, it's a name. Like, you don't. So that's a whole different panel that we could talk about gender and all of those things. But yeah, I would say honestly, so far, knock on wood, it's been pretty smooth. So definitely some awkward stuff, mostly with strangers, to be honest. Like when they see me and they're like, you know, I'm very masculine presenting, but I have a chest. And then like they'll hear Harper, who's about to be 3, you know, call me Papa. And especially kids will be like, why are they calling you Papa? And it's like, and just look at them like, because I'm their Papa. But the first time it happened to me, to be honest with you, I was totally caught off guard. And all of a sudden I was like, you know, 5 years old on a playground and my adrenaline's rushing. And I'm like, oh my God, this little kid is asking me, what do I do? You know, and then, and then I just, you know, the things that you do as a parent and the ways in which you show up and you stand firm in who you are and secure for them has helped in a lot of ways too, to sort of make me even more fortified in who I am in a lot of ways. So it's been a really interesting journey, but mostly pretty smooth. And we were kind of in lockstep in terms of who would carry and all of that, because I just didn't really want to do that. So that's our story.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Michelle, I haven't heard from you. Do you have any early in the conception life stories to share with us?
Yeah, it was just taking pause and thinking back to some early Our Family Coalition days with Polly, having like trying to conceive, I think, and maybe even just having a young kiddo and just noticing the time and distance between that, like having a 9-year-old now and thinking back about a lot of these conversations, like what are the things that I think about and hold on to as that have shaped that experience? And also like what's so loud or noisy now about the time and space and being a parent. To Jess's point, so touched by that. I think probably one of the most stressful things I've experienced is in choosing my parenting name. Probably as big of a decision for me, if not harder. Hello, Dash, cute face. As difficult as top surgery was. And for us, I was having an inflection or intersection of both like making some choices around my own gender identity at the time we were thinking about becoming parents. And so that was kind of a swirl of the conversation then as well. But I go by Baba, my wife goes by Mama, and we have there's a large actually Baba contingent in the Bay Area of folks that we know, and are also agree. I think that strangers ask the most rude questions more than people that are in your inner circle, or inappropriate things that I think you wouldn't just ask a straight couple about how they got pregnant. And I think for us during the time of after we conceived and then as new parents, it was a lot of conversation because we used a known donor about like, what does that look like? Like who's participating in your family and who like, yeah, a lot of people want to know like who it is, like who's going to be in charge of your family. And we've just like always been very much of the abundance mindset, like how can more people loving on our kiddos be wrong at any way, shape, or turn? And so for us, it was just always going to be everybody all at the table in whatever way that looked like. And the only thing I did want to say is just like taking a note on a lot of the cost of a lot of things that was like socioeconomically was like a barrier. And I think it's worth a note in any of these conversations always that that's not an option for people to have access to specific kinds of medical care. So it wasn't an option for us to do IVF, even if we wanted to do that. Wasn't even an option for us to pay for sperm every month if we wanted to do that. Like we really legitimately did the like 2 guys in the room, do their business, salsa jar on the table, high-fiving each other out the door and into the room and doing that on our own. And we had to do that probably for longer than we would have liked, because that was where we needed to meet our socioeconomics at the time. And so want to just say, I think like that's worth noting in the process too, that sometimes those are amidst all of the grieving and mourning and sorting, there's also a real conversation about what does that look like for a family too. So
thank you. Yes, it is so important. And I think a lot of folks who haven't had to shop for sperm don't know how expensive it is, because people are just giving it away for free. And you know, and so the early conversations I had with close circles of friends and even family, one of the first things I would do is I'd be like, guess how much one ejaculate of sperm is, and like and like nobody ever got it right. Let me tell you, nobody ever guessed $995 plus shipping and handling. Nobody. So it's one of those things, like it is an education to even people in the queer community. This is not a common conversation of how expensive. And again, we are mostly speaking on the, uterus havers side. Like you go into surrogacy for like gay males and trans folks, and that is a whole another add 2 or 3 more zeros at the end ball game. So family building, as all of us know, like one of the biggest challenges in any family and biggest areas of argument is money. And so you're starting already being like, even to build our family, yes, can totally be done in a non-cost prohibitive way, but so many of the ways that we're being told by healthcare providers to, or so many of the ways that we are being told because maybe we've waited a few more years, is extremely cost prohibitive and shocking. So yes, thank you, Michelle, for bringing that up, because we had a known donor that fell through, and then it immediately became fine. I guess we're just dropping like $5,000 today. Like it was like, we've been having these conversations with a known donor for 4 or 5 months. My wife is ovulating, pull out the credit card. Let's just make this happen today. So it is pretty wild.
We bought our sperm through a sperm bank. There's not any in Kansas or anywhere near us, but we went through a big sperm bank in Seattle, and we actually ended up buying, our donor was on special. So that is a way to save money. Just use that coupon, I guess you would call it. He was like in the email. We had been looking, and he was on special, and
like a Labor Day sale.
I know, like, can we ask a follow-up question? What does that mean exactly?
I mean,
the donor of the month.
Yeah, promo
like
codes,
the
that's
highlight.
great.
Yeah, so he was on sale. I try not to look at it as like we're paying for sperm, we're paying for them to kind of vet the sperm. We get a full health history. I literally know more about their health history than I do my own, and all of that. So yeah, no, there's always discounts to be had, even at the sperm bank. But so my wife before the pandemic taught pre-K, and it's interesting with 4 and 5-year-olds, they're taught you need, and you need a man and a woman to make a baby. Biologically, you do. but they thought it was so cool that our baby would have two moms, but they had like some questions, and we would just talk about how we needed to hire out help, just simply like you need to hire someone to do
Subcontractor.
plumbing. Yeah, it was just it's somebody that we needed help, and so we hired it out. We live in a pretty privileged area, but that made sense for a lot of the kids. Like Abby and Allie needed help, so we hired some help at a discount, and that's how we became moms.
I'm going to throw a small tidbit in here because I know that we want to get to the next topic, but Michelle, thank you for bringing up money and economics. It's like, it was really, really hard for us to make that decision and go into debt for our little person who's already going to put us in debt.
Right.
Because like, that's what they do. Yeah, diapers are awesome. And I don't know how many sleep stacks I've gone through to figure out to get this kid to sleep. But they're cute. So one of the things that I also did is I went through, when it came to IVF, I was bargain shopping for IVF. I was also looking at IVF not in this country. I also looked at, there's a lot of nonprofits out there, and there's a lot of grants and grant funding. And I have friends that have also done like IVF trials, clinical trials of like, what if we gave you an extra shot this week? Would it be better? And like all of those things. And so if you are in that planning stage, if you are thinking like, oh, I will want to try this, maybe there's funding out there. You long processes, and it's sometimes really disheartening if you put into all these like applications. I put in so many applications, and I'm like, but we're ovulating, I need this now. And they're like, sorry, we won't pay for it if there's already a conception and so forth. Like they won't prorate it. So it's very interesting, but there is some funding out there. I also got into some very heated arguments with my organization going like, okay, if you're going to pay for this type of care, why am I not getting my own IVF fertility? Like this is really important, and this should be a health benefit with my medical stuff. And so I got really kind of like passionate and advocating for myself, but also as a whole advocating for people at my organization. I work for an LGBTQ Jewish organization. And so we're kind of one step ahead. And that conversation was well received, but I can see it being really hard. One other thing is, if you don't know this, there's like, if you work for Starbucks, you get really good IVF coverage. There's IVF babies, like groups and everything, because their medical coverage is so good.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, like, just with sperm, we did the IUI, and the best thing with the pandemic, no traffic makes picking up sperm really easy. Like cross the bridge, back home, 30 minutes, we're set. It didn't work, but we tried.
Yeah. Listen, where there's a will, there's a way. I think, just before we move on to the next conversation, something that I inform people of all the time, like you can buy sperm and do IUI or ICI at home yourself. You can hire a midwife for a fraction of the cost of going to a reproductive center. And there's also legislation in at least California, but I'm sure a few other states that help with fertility preservation for trans and non-binary folks. So if you wanted to do reciprocal IVF or surrogacy or something else. So there, reach out to organizations, look for nonprofits, ask folks. There are a lot of people who have figured ways through a very opaque medical system. We've done it, but it's not easy. So thank you everyone for sharing that information. I did also want to talk a little bit about expectations around bonding and when the baby is here, and did folks have a lot of anxiety of if you would feel a connection to a child, or did you have the expectation that this would absolutely be your kid and maybe that didn't feel immediate? I know that even there's not a lot of conversation about the non-gestational partners having postpartum anxiety is pretty high in partners that were not the gestating parent. So good or bad, like what did postpartum and the bonding phase kind of feel for you as the non-bio parent? Well, yeah.
I can share, and I'm going to also ask you to indulge me real quick. I was going to say also about the last conversation. We literally thought we accidentally got an IVF. We thought that we had insurance. Like Mimi thought she had insurance coverage through her job at the time, and they were covering everything. And then she found out later that they were not supposed to be covering it, but it was too late. And that company actually went out of business, but it was too late. And there was this big lawsuit that we were just kind of like on the side of, but it covered everything. So we literally just like that. When I say Langston probably should not have been here, like that was one of the things. But so in terms of bonding, so I'm an acupuncturist, and I'm trained as a 5-element acupuncturist, which is really about like spiritual connection with like really treating a person from a spiritual perspective or their spiritual being. And then, you know, all the physical stuff shows up as a symptom of disharmony in some part of our spiritual body. And so one of the people that we definitely connected with first was our acupuncturist and me with my acupuncture community. And so Mimi was in acupuncture treatment from before she started, before we started trying to conceive, and then after Langston was born. And I also knew, I knew him before he got here. I knew him throughout the whole process. I also spoke with our, now that I'm thinking about stuff, I'm like, oh my God, that happened too. I also spoke with our doctor about, I found out that I could lactate. And so I went through the process for induced lactation. And so I had like a little bit of colostrum the first week, maybe 2. And then I wasn't very consistent with the protocol, but I knew that I also wanted to have that experience with him. And so that was also part of my bonding. So I bonded with him when he was actually like, you know, teeny tiny microscopic. And before we knew his physical being, I knew him. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to connect with your future baby. And yeah, I also induced lactation. The protocol is a lot. It's intense, and we ended up only being able to produce. I ended up only being able to produce for 3 months, but you know, it was an additional way to bond. It was an additional way to give my wife a break so that she could sleep for a few more hours, and build up a little bit of a milk supply. So that's another option out there for folks that do want to or want to try. That's something else that's on the table. Who else might want to share about bonding and what it felt like postpartum? Allie?
Yeah, so we had a pretty traumatic birth. My wife was in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. And then she delivered our child 4 weeks early with preeclampsia. It was very, very dramatic. And when our child was born, she went to the NICU, and my wife wasn't able to get out of her hospital bed for 24 hours due to the medication that she was on. So I actually, and she got to hold her and like briefly before she went to the NICU, but it was kind of just me and Millie the first 24 hours, which I would have never wanted that to happen that way, but I felt instantly she was mine. She is mine. And I got those first 24 hours with her, going back and forth between the two. But I think honestly, like looking back, that those those were our 24 hours together. and I got to kind of bond with her a little bit differently. But I think, I mean, there was never a question, like, she's just turned 2 last month. She looks just like my wife, like the spitting image, but her faces, like from a very young age, have all been like my faces. So there was never like, I feel like every day is nature versus nurture in our house, and they're both, I feel like, are at play. But I think those first 24 hours, as horrible as it was, and I had to leave my wife when she was getting her placenta like ripped out of her. I wouldn't take back those 24 hours with my daughter that we had together.
Yeah, sometimes really tough realities allow you kind of an opportunity too. So it is nice that there was something good that came out of a very difficult birth situation. Thanks for sharing that. Randy?
Yeah. So with my kind of mourning process of not being able to carry and going kind of like, well, then who am I? What am I? What am I? And mind you, it's like, I knew I would be a great mom, and I'd always wanted to be a mom, but it was like, okay, well, I wanted to have this experience too. And so I supported my partner all through her pregnancy. And I knew all the fun little facts and like cool things to do. But another thing that I did, and especially with the pandemic, is I advocated for myself and ourselves. I made sure that my partner was taken care of, but I advocated for the things that I also wanted. So when it came to our birth plan, we talked a lot about like what that would look like and how I can't control the situation. I am not the doula this time. Like, I am just the parent. But one thing that was really important to me, I was like, if there's any possible way, I want to catch this baby.
Mhm.
I have been to many births, and I need to catch my son, or my baby. I didn't know what he would be at that point. And then as it happened, they were like, Randy, put some gloves on, and I got to catch my son. And it was the most magical experience. But I advocated for myself, saying that like, this is what I want, or like, this would be special for me. And I packed the bag, and I put like his outfit together. And instead of inducing lactation, I did a supplemental nursing system. So it's like a little tiny tube that you tape to your chest, and it goes along the nipple and into the baby's mouth. And he fed off of me for a couple of weeks. But we wanted to establish a stronger latch with his other mom. So, but that was our bonding time. And I just really embraced everything that we could do. And as Ali said, like the facial expressions, he definitely does some things that I'm like, oh, that's very me, or that's not so much my partner. And nature versus nurture. And we're together all the time, and we are still, I'm not just the other mom, and he looks just like my partner. And people are really afraid to say that to me. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I hate to say this, Randy, he looks so much like Ashley. And I'm like, he came out of her. Like, of course he does. And that's okay to say. And I think being really transparent and upfront with people, sometimes when they say those awkward, like, why'd you say that to me? I am the real mom, and no, I'm not the dad. We don't have a mom and dad. And no, the donor is not the dad. Correcting people in the moment and saying, no, the donor is not the dad. We don't call the donor that. And he came from a donor. And that's how it goes. They're not the dad. And I think being really upfront and talking about that, same thing as you're kind of in the Bay Area, it's like correcting a pronoun. Just fix it, period. So.
Yeah, thank you. Jess, were you gonna add?
Yeah, I realized I wasn't on mute, and I cleared my throat, so I'm sorry about that. I wasn't trying to interrupt. But sure, yes. I kind of, took some similar approaches. made the playlist for the birthing situation. And we had more of like a hyped up playlist and then more of like a Zen playlist. And we ended up going more with the hyped up one because the Zen one was just too Zen when it came down to it. Because we also had a very long labor. It was like several days. But yeah, so I think in terms of that, did pack the bag. I also got to catch Harper, which was really cool. And what was really cool, I mean, because what was it, 2018? Yeah, 2018. So like, obviously everyone has cell phones and stuff. We had ended up having a doula, which if you can afford to have a doula, there's many that are on sliding scales. Ours was on a sliding scale. And when we had our shower, we actually asked people to donate to help us afford it. And that was like by far the best investment I think that we could have made for both my partner and myself. Just for the weekly check-ins, she had connections to midwives here in the Bay who also would come to our house. So we really were sad because financially we wanted to have a home birth, but we couldn't afford it. And so we had to go, we have Kaiser, so we went into Kaiser. And they have midwives there. I'm like, okay, we're just gonna like figure out how to make this work. But up until we could get into Kaiser, because we did not want to be induced, we had a midwife who would come and we would pay her what we could. Sometimes it was just food to help, do a wellness check on my partner and the baby, just to kind of come back to that whole socioeconomic thing, because that's very real. And then, yeah, when we got to the hospital and stuff and I got to catch the baby, they're much more slippery than you would anticipate. It's like, it kind of scared me. I was like, I don't want to have my first moment touching this child to drop this child. But it was really cool. And then, they were born to a Beyonce song, Love on Top, which was really, so we have all of it recorded and we're like, this is your birth song, Harper. And prior to that, like every night I would, we would play music. Harper really loved Taki Taki at the time. Cardi B was really big. So it was like, they would start dancing in the womb. We could see the belly moving and stuff. And, I would talk a lot to the baby. And then I think the strongest bonding, I mean, we were bonded instantly, I would say, but the strongest bond that still to this day manifests is, so right after the baby's born, and one thing that people don't tell you too, by the way, is like when you have the baby, right before the baby's about to pop out, it gets crazy in the hospital room. Like, and because we were at Kaiser, which is also a teaching school. So there was just so many people who came in and the doula was like, literally did a quick timeout and was like, listen, it's about to get crazy in here. Like you need to like lock in because there's gonna be a million people. So it was super helpful. But after that, they take your baby and they start performing that test. I forget what it's called, where they like check the eyes and ears and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just standing there, like watching the baby, not really knowing what to do. And the nurse was like, you can like, try and comfort them or something. And so I did this on Harper's cheek. And to this day, if I do that to them, they go and like lean into it. Like they could be literally doing anything. And that was like our first real moment of touch and bonding and connection. And that just lasted from there. And yeah, there's never really been, for me, a feeling of Harper not being my child. It just, it just is. Like, it is what it is. Like, this is how it happened. And they were always, meant to be mine. And I think in a lot of ways, we helped to manifest who they were, because a lot of the things that we were hoping for, they ended up becoming. So I kind of get with the spirituality piece, Malia, that you were talking about. And I think that, yeah, paths cross for a reason, right? And so I think that we're all, meant to be parents a particular way. And the bonding piece, it comes, sometimes it does feel a little weird, but for the most part, like weird in the sense that sometimes people want to invalidate, or maybe not take it as seriously. But in terms of the connection between myself and my child, it's never been a question. And my partner's also been really good about never invalidating either, because I think sometimes that can happen too in partnerships.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jess. And to kind of underline that last piece is like really making sure that you and your partner are having those honest conversations when maybe they say something that kind of hits you the wrong way, or they're like, well, I'm the pregnant one, or, whatever. People say things in passing. People say things when pregnant. People say things when sleep deprived and postpartum. but taking that moment to have like an honest check-in of like, hey, we're a team. This is our baby. This is our pregnancy. This is our family unit. And like really just making sure that you are a team going into this, because it only gets harder, as I'm sure Michelle can attest.
Crystal, I just want to, one thing I just want to kind of add, because you had mentioned it, and I think it was so great for you to mention, is the postpartum anxiety.
Yes.
This is all magic. Like, it's so magical with everything and the births of our babies and all of those things. But my partner and I she had a great birth. We had okay care team and so forth. And then we had some bumps in the road. Then my partner had more postpartum anxiety than I did. And it was like, okay. And as he's gotten older and things have gotten more real and just the way things go, like I've had to up some antidepressants because of postpartum anxiety. And that's a very real thing. There's both postpartum depression and there's postpartum anxiety, and both partners, no matter your gender identity, no matter the sexual orientation, no matter what, it's very real. Because as someone said to me yesterday, how's that new little soul in your household? And I went, oh, right. Like we have this new soul in our household, and like, how is that working? And I think it's okay to talk about those things. It's okay to talk about mental health and say, hey, you know what? I love this little person so much, but it's really hard and I'm tired. And so forth. I'm anxious. I'm worried that he's going to stop breathing in the middle of the night. I'm really worried that the food I gave him today is going to make him die, even though it's blueberries. And like, they're the lowest things on the scale. And Michelle, like, you have older kids. And so it's like, you have to send them to school every day. And like, it's a pandemic. And so I think it's really honest to say, like, this is really tough. This is really exciting. And it's okay to reach out and ask for help and not get things perfect, because nothing is perfect.
And that it doesn't have to, like, you're not going to have postpartum depression always like right after you give birth. Like it can appear 3-6 months, like there's no like set time limit on that. Cause I would say like, it's a life changing, it's traumatic. Like having a kid enter your home is a traumatic thing that happens to you. Like no matter how beautiful and how wanted the child is, it completely changes your life. So I think for me, my anxiety showed up more after our kid was more mobile. Like when she was just this little tiny nugget that we just changed, gave a bottle, put her to sleep. That was awesome. Like newborn days were great for us. But now when she is climbing on everything and pushing boundaries, that's what's triggered my postpartum anxiety and my generalized anxiety, is that there is an entire human being living in my house now, not a blob. And that has changed a lot. So I think it's exactly right that any partner, whether, the gender identity, can experience that. I think it's also not limited to just, right after. It's always, it's just a huge life transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to, as early as you can and as often as you need to, find affirming care providers. Like something I was told by a very affirming LGBT focused doula was, you can fire anyone on your healthcare team at any time for any reason and find someone new. Like if someone in the birth room is saying or doing something that makes you uncomfortable, you have the right to kick them out mid push and get somebody new. Like these are things that especially, I hate to say it, but especially happen with a lot of queer families when you're in a healthcare setting. There are invalidating things that are said. There are things that are done without your consent. And you have a right at any point, pre-birth, during birth, postpartum, when your kid is 3 years old, you can fire a healthcare provider and find a new one. Because you should feel safe and you should feel like you can turn to them and ask them things.
I feel like I took on that role like as the non-bio mom, like because I think like there are acts of like aggression against our community in a healthcare setting, but also knowing like in the moment, like the person pushing out a baby out of their vagina, like not having that on their plate, like having someone else advocate, and also advocating before you get to that point. Our my wife's childhood best friend and our child's godmother was an OBGYN in the practice we go to, and so she kind of did a lot of advocating for us, handpicked our nurses and our entire team. So that was never an issue that we came across, but just knowing that like I was like loud and proud, like, no, I am not a friend. Like, I'm not somebody here visiting. I think one person, and it was just a nurse in passing, like, oh, well, like visitors need to leave. And I'm like, nope, not that. That's great. That very well may be, but that I'm not a visitor. But having someone maybe a little bit less hormonal, being the advocate, I think is a good thing. A good rule.
Yes, thank you. And I'm already aghast at what Malia just put in the chat box. No, people should ask your relation, or you should have a name tag that has your relation. This is obscene.
It was total shade. It was total shade from that nurse too, because Mimi had just gone in and she said, my wife's parking the car. She'll be in after she's finished parking the car. And we're the only two, except for the staff, we're the only two Black women coming into the office. And I walk in and she's like, oh, who are you? And I said, and then she's like, oh, were you her mother? So it was definitely shade. And Randy, you were right. It's exhausting to constantly have to come out. And Michelle, I'd be curious to hear your perspective because your kiddos are older, because I feel like it's not going to ever end. And, as we're parents, like graduation, there's going to be a thing.
Michelle, what does the future hold for all of us?
Well, I don't, it maybe easier isn't the right, I don't think it's, I'm like really in the space of trying not to judge the thing as it is, right? Like easier or harder. I think that I recognize muscles I've built over time. Like I feel like a pro in the daycare space, in the school setting, of like being a baba and educating people, and like, just our youngest started kindergarten this year. And so I'm like prepared on the playground for like the kids running up as they get to know each other. And they're like, are you a boy or a girl? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? Like, how would you figure that out? Like, what does your critical thinking skills, tell you? And how do you answer those questions? So I think some of those things I like have found my voice in the world. But I think to your point, Malia, there's things that catch me that I'm like, ooh, I haven't built this muscle yet. Or like, ooh, isn't an interaction where I have had to, where my identity isn't a norm. And so I'm finding my way in the world, while also like there's not so much of me just finding my way, but like my kids are humans that are like advocating for themselves. And so together it's a lot more conversation about like, how do we show up? And like, how does that feel for you? You have as many emotions as in that moment as I do. And how do we like honor and sort of have presence to that? So we as a family can think about those things together. Just like as an example, my name alone going by Baba, I come from like a very big religious Portuguese family. And so there's like a lot of like, people are like, Baba is such like a baby name. The girls are going to outgrow that at some point, which is like not really about the name, but about many more things than that. And so even within family, that's not even an external thing in the world. How do we sort of navigate our continuing identity with name, with like their own figuring out of their identities in association to, in relation to us. I think it's an ongoing conversation for me. I feel like what a goddamn gift in the world. What an opportunity to be able to find and create space and create presence that I feel like my job is to model that so they can authentically find their own, and that literally is a piece of the work, is just me showing up to figure out my stuff that models for them how they can do that and navigate that too. And we just had great experience in daycare. Chatham Elementary, or Chatham Daycare in Oakland is where we went, and like it was magic. Whenever they were like, what holiday do you want to celebrate for Parents' Day? And they like made songs that used Baba, and every arts and craft that came home was Baba, and like really made it a space. And by doing that, they created a normalcy for my kids, and also for those other kids in that elementary school, that like this is the family dynamic and how families get made, that now they get to carry with them into their next experiences. So I feel like there's less like kind of that for me now, and much more to your point about like my heart walking around navigating the world is a real moment that we're in. That's that's like kind of where we are as parents, is like, do you walk home from school by yourself? You know, I grew up in the 80s. Polly Klaas got snatched out of her house. Like, I'm not at 9, you are not going to come home by yourself. No, thank you. But that's my own shit, you know, to figure out. So this is like kind of some of the things that we're struggling with at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know even though my kiddo is just 1, like we're already starting to have like, okay, what are the conversations that we need to have like with the daycare provider? Like, hey, we're 2 moms. Hey, we do gender creative parenting. Hey, we're those people from, the Bay Area, and like we only do organic, and like we just feel like we're this stereotype that we have to explain. And yeah,